The most important questions about AI shouldn't be how to prompt or how AI hallucinates. They should be about us.
Who shapes these systems? What do we want to become together? What kind of world are we weaving?
Welcome to Between Us and the Machine.
With Margot van Brakel
and Juliette McDowell.
Don't forget to subscribe.
Welcome. Every major AI ethics framework produced in the last decade, from the EU AI Act to UNESCO's recommendation on ethics of AI, is built around a person who arrives in the world already formed. Ubuntu says that a person doesn't exist. Our talk today will explain why that matters for every AI system being built right now.
David Matsigne is a political sociologist, international law scholar, and a human rights strategist. He's the founder of Aristo and ZenBill and director of research policy and advocacy. His recent writing on Ubuntu and AI ethics has named it a rival ontology to the entire global AI governance project. David, it's very exciting for having you here. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here and thank you for the invitation.
David, your piece was extremely provocative, and you open it with Ubuntu, Ubuntu, Ubuntu. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I probably didn't. A person is a person through other persons. When Ubuntu gets flattened to this feel-good idea about community, what are we missing, and what does it cost us when we govern AI?
Absolutely. So the phrase is a Zulu phrase, but you can find its equivalent in many African languages throughout the continent. It's umuntu, ungumuntu, ngabantu, which means a person is a person through other people. We don't live isolated lives. So the exclusion of that really, it's an epistemic violence, because that's not how we function. That's not how we come into being. So the three of us here, none of us willed ourselves into being. We came into the world through a communion of at least two people who were also in a communion of many other people in the family, in the community. And they have raised us, that community, that network of relationships. Those are the things that have made us who we are. So to then say a person is a completely walled individual, a fortress, it's really to miss what a person is. The person that AI assumes exists really is a fiction. It's a creation of modernity. In fact, there's one scholar who spent a lot of time in the Netherlands called Norbert Elias. He explains this question very clearly, that actually the person, the individual, the way we think of the individual today is an invention of modernity, of creation of states, creation of capitalism, and so on and so on. So that is why, for me, the way I look at AI is that it cannot function properly while it assumes the kind of individual that is a falsehood. So that's a philosophy of existence, of becoming, of ontology. We are never a complete product. We are always being produced through the relationships in which we're embedded.
Yeah, I think, there's so much in just those words that we should be taking on and rethinking into everything that we do. It's a gift to have you here and to remind us of that. Now, David, you cite Mogobe Ramosi's framing of Ubuntu as an onto-ethical claim. Personhood is an achievement constituted through relationship and reciprocal obligation. What does that do to the concept of individual consent as the central instrument of AI ethics?
Well, because Ubuntu rejects the idea of a self that is preformed, it also means that consent must move away from this idea of a preformed self towards the community, the relational existence. So that also means the transaction between tech companies and the individual, this bilateral transaction, is also fictitious because it fails to take into account the relationships within which the individual is embedded. These same relationships that gives the individual their identity, their ability to live, to act, and build relationships in the world. So it means consent must move away from this fictitious individual. It must bring in the community because that's where the authority lies, because the data, in fact, that this individual is supposed to have control of it does not belong to them alone. It's the data is actually traces, bits and pieces, the trails and tracks of we as members of the community. We try to organize our lives in our everyday lives. We leave all of those traces, we leave all of those artifacts, we leave all of those debris behind us. So I cannot, as an individual, claim to have complete control on this, on the data. It belongs to all of us. It belongs to the community. So that's the implication to the idea of consent when it comes to AI, when we take this perspective of Ubuntu.
David, this gives us a really very good framework from which we can expand. And so this fact that our embeddedness of relationships and networks and histories, they exceed the individual. Let's talk about how that looks practically, about how AI governance should work.
So in terms of how AI governance should work, because AI really reflects the reality as we understand it. So if you want AI to reflect, biases, then you feed into it the biases that already exist. And many of us are not actually even conscious of that. We don't even do it deliberately. We work with what we have. But what we have is already built through exploitative systems, exploitative relations. So that means when it comes to the governance of AI, if we think of it in terms of Ubuntu, the governance of AI does not end at the state level. The governance of AI goes all the way down to the community. Under democracies, governments presumably represent the people, right? So it tends to be unproblematic when they make decisions about anything, including AI, in the name of in the United States, they say government of the people, by the people, for the people. But we do know that in many countries, it's not that. It's government of some people, by some people, for some people, right? So in Africa, for instance, where you have a lot of illegitimate governments that cannot claim legitimacy because of the way they have come into power, it's a serious problem. So governance of AI must go all the way down to the community. The community must decide about the governance. There must be data governance boards that will make decisions at the community level. They could have lawyers there, but it must be a law that takes into account community law, indigenous law, so that these governance issues are addressed appropriately in representation of the people as they should be.
Yeah, so I know we're looking at this idea from different angles and maybe repeating ourselves, but just want to, because it's really fundamental to understand what we're talking about and the foundation of your vision and the vision of Ubuntu in relationship to AI. When we look at the UNESCO's 2021 AI recommendation, it cites cultural diversity as a value. It acknowledges Ubuntu as a resource and leaves the individual centric architecture of AI governance structurally intact. So, how do you know when inclusion is genuine and when it is domestication?
Yes, powerful systems have a way of tokenizing the excluded, usually to tick the box. They have the power to do that. They bulldoze their way through and tick the box, and the structures remain the same. The point is to change the structure, the base, all these building blocks. I don't think UNESCO's AI ethics is a declaration of a change in the unit of AI ethics. It builds upon this idea of the individual that we've already talked about. I was referencing the scholar who spent a lot of time there in the Netherlands, talking about the individual of modernity that is a closed individual, right? So this individual actually runs through all the philosophical base of democracy in the West, and also in all the kinds of systems that have been built internationally, that dominate, the international system, including the UN. So here, UNESCO makes reference in the preamble to Ubuntu and indigenous knowledges, but it does not use them in order to build the framework that it's trying to build. So it's not enough. We need to do more, right? We need to do more in order to have a meaningful transformation in the AI ethics that we're talking about, including UNESCO's.
It's
And that's
kind of like, sorry, Julianne, I know you want to ask something, but so it reminds me of greenwashing. Like you say it's a reference, but you don't do anything with it. Yeah.
Yes, it's cosmetics. It's greenwashing indeed, if you can
I'm
put
not
it
really
that way.
so sure it's greenwashing as much as it's the lens in which they're looking at things. And I think that
Mhm.
that's the important point, is that you could say that something is so very ethical, but if the lens you're looking at it is through the individual, then you're always going to come to the same kind of skewed conclusion. I think that's what you're saying, David.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And we are not saying that, the baby must be thrown out with the bathwater. No, that's not what we are saying. It's a very important document. We should have it. But what we are saying is it does not go far enough.
And that's why the reference you make to Abeba Berhani's work, showing that relational ethics grounded in Ubuntu produces categorically different conclusions about fairness and stakeholders and harm. I think that is an important point to make. Can you give us a concrete example of where those conclusions diverge from what the current frameworks produce?
So, for instance, you see these traditional credit institutions, Usually women use them. In South Africa, they call them stokvel, right? They call them stokvel, and in other countries they have, a different name. So those institutions they use a different credit worthiness, understanding, you know. So somebody's credit worth not not on the basis of this individual who is cut off from all the relationships in their community and only wants to use those communities when they need them, you know. So their credit worthiness is measured, differently on the basis of, somebody's embeddedness in the community. So that's, an instance in which, things look different. But we also have organizations such as Masakani, for instance. I don't know whether you've heard of it. Masakani means let's build together. They curate data sets on African languages. Those are open source, and they also want better representation of those languages in the computing systems, AI systems. And so what you get there, is something, entirely, divergent from what we have in the current model, right? So, because the current model is really extractive, is privatization of the commons, because these data that on which these AI systems are based are really part of our commons. They are being privatized. The alternative systems that I've just mentioned, they don't do that. They treat the commons as the commons belong to people, and they go into the systems that way.
Yeah. David, you've spent years working in human rights and international law. Have you ever seen a moment where a non Western framework genuinely changed the architecture of a global governance institution, not just its language?
Absolutely. There is the African Charter of Human and People's Rights that of 1981. In that charter, you can see Ubuntu as part of the architecture of that document. It's the only human rights document, declaration, uh, or instrument in the world that brings into its structure the idea of collective rights, which is actually very common in indigenous communities. So, for instance, here in Canada, you have indigenous communities that speak about their rights in terms of collectivities. In fact, they even go beyond that. They speak of themselves as one with nature. And all of these systems are not visible, are not included in these international human rights instruments. Now, lately, there's the UN Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights that attempts to get there. It's not fully there, but it has integrated some of these indigenous knowledges, the rights of collectivities, the rights of people to freely dispose of their wealth. So they do exist. The only problem that we have is weak enforcement.
Yeah.
So while we have these instruments and the architecture, we need strong enforcement mechanisms all over the world, including in Africa, where they began, with Ubuntu as part of the architecture. In fact, I could add that even here in Canada, when it comes to the enrich, the Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights, the implementation is very weak because the dominant system still excludes, views that as a footnote, as an appendage in the international legal system.
Yeah. So, what does a consent framework then look like when the community, not the individual, is the unit of moral analysis?
I would say it would mean the government, all these institutions seeking consent, tech companies, do not come in for a once-off agreement,
Hmm.
right? They come in and there are deliberations of what consent should look like. And that consent is an ongoing.
Yeah.
So when the company leaves or when the government leaves, the community maintains and reserves the right to withdraw at any moment when they decide the agreement is being broken or when they see that new circumstances require withdrawal. It also means the community will continue to monitor how this consent is being used.
Yeah.
And if they find it wanting in the way it's being used, they will withdraw or they will renegotiate. There's always that openness. It also means the community accrues benefits.
Yeah.
It's not just, the tech company coming in and get consent, extract the data and they're gone and they make billions and billions of dollars and the community gets nothing out of it. Because that's what's happening at the moment. When it comes, for instance, to the extraction of mineral resources,
Hmm.
and that mode of extraction is being transferred into the extraction of data. That's the new mining. That's the new extraction um, of resources that we see happening. So I think that's what consent would look like when the community is centered. I cannot hear you, Juliet.
Thank you, David. In researching for the article I wrote, which brought in a lot of your thinking here, I found that Christine Klassen from the University of Trento, she's a researcher. Last year, she published her dissertation, which found that empirically communities that were practicing Ubuntu prioritized dignity, data security, and care over transparency and autonomy. Does her empirical work confirm what your argument is predicting?
I think what her work does is to actually go to the wells of Ubuntu directly and draw from there because she does not begin with formative theories, with abstraction. She builds from the ground up to see what Ubuntu looks like in practice, how people in their everyday lives are living out Ubuntu, how they're demonstrating it. So for the communities, it's not an abstractive, process to speak about Ubuntu. In fact, I have a background in theology as well. So one of the things that they say there, or they would say, the best way of preaching is not to talk, is to live the word, right? And let people listen by watching how you live. So I think what she has done is to actually listen to the community activities, not just listen to them talk, but observing and learning and see and feel Ubuntu and, transmit it to the world. I think she's on point. There's a convergence between what she's observed and what Ubuntu scholars have been saying. But also, that doesn't mean that Ubuntu, in fact, what she's done is a demonstration that Ubuntu is not, it's not a frozen thing. It's something really dynamic that actually evolves and changes with the changing circumstances that the communities are dealing with. So that's what I would say in terms of our work and its relevance in relation to what these scholars on Ubuntu have been saying all along.
Thank you. We're coming almost to the close of this segment, but I'd like to end a little bit differently today, and to say that technology is not neutral, and that's actually why we're having these conversations. Every system that's being built right now encodes someone's value, their assumptions about what a person is and what fairness means and what matters. And right now, as you mentioned, it encodes Western individualism and extraction, competition, exploitation, and that's not inevitable. It's actually a design choice. And if we start from Ubuntu, like you mentioned, we don't get better AI governance, but we get, you know, a variety of things. And so I would like to ask you, this mirror that's held up to society, and society is being able to change. Do you actually believe this?
I do believe that when you hold up a mirror, reflects who you are. Unfortunately, I think the way the mirror is being held today actually it shows a fiction, right? It shows fiction of this individual that doesn't really exist in practical terms. And it shows an image of a society that is built also on the fictitious idea of an individual. So that's problematic because it's upon those pillars that technology is built. It's not neutral. It's true. And if you hold up Ubuntu as a mirror, you see not a closed self, not a walled up self. You see a relational self, not an isolated I, right? And so for me, it's very important that we we fight to have access to the workshop in which this mirror is being built, because Ubuntu is not there yet. Ubuntu must be on the workshop of building the mirror that will reflect the relational self. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do, all of us. You know, um, yeah, that's my understanding of it.
Mm. I really hope that people just listen to all of this and listen to it again and again and again, and just take away all the different ways of thinking that you are opening up by really bringing in a fundamentally different vision on humanity than in the Western world we are accustomed to. So this is the last question for you, David. With all the food for thought you've already given, you talk about African philosophy, and you give the kind of choices. Is it invited to the table, or is it being served as the centerpiece? We want to leave our listeners with the image you carry of what it looks like when we are changing that answer.
Yes, the idea of the temple encodes hierarchy and very skewed differential powers. So someone get legitimacy on the basis of the position of power they have at the table, and the table actually mirrors that. My image, the image that I have, is not a table, is what in isiZulu is called indaba. It's a circle. It's a circle. That's what I see. A circle is common as well among the indigenous peoples of the Americas. They sit in a table to discuss issues that concern them. So authority and legitimacy does not come or is not earned on the basis of your rank. It's earned on the basis of the relationships that are reflected in the circle. We see each other. Nobody's hiding behind anyone. There's a lot of transparency. So what I see is really a mirror. It's not a table. It's a circle in which we're all sitting together and build AI together on the basis of Ubuntu and indigenous knowledges.
David, this is the end of the segment, but the beginning of a conversation. And hopefully we can have more people joining around the table. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Let's continue the conversation. Let's build alliances. We can't let just academics and governments and policymakers, speak alone with tech companies. Let's collectively make this conversation go around and make the decisions that will best benefit humanity.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening. You've been listening to Between Us and the Machine. That's it for today. Thanks for being part of this conversation.
Subscribe wherever you listen and share this with someone who should hear it.
This is Between Us
and the Machine.